Ever built a website that should be fast, but it just isn't? It stutters, it lags, and it's just plain frustrating. Well, there's a good chance a silent performance killer called layout thrashing is the culprit. Today, we're going to hunt it down and learn how to stop it for good. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about that jank you hate. You know what I'm talking about. Then, we'll dive into how browsers actually render pages. This is super important. That'll set us up perfectly for the number one fix, which is batching. After that, we'll look at some smart CSS tricks and finish up by talking about what it means to have a real performance mindset. Okay, first up, the jank. We've all felt this, right? You're on a site, you try to scroll or click something, and it just stutters. It feels broken. That awful laggy experience, that's what we call jank. And it's so frustrating because you look at your code and it seems perfectly fine. It's logical, it's clean, but on the screen, the animations are choppy and the whole thing just feels slow. So what is going on? What's the invisible bottleneck here? So if you're seeing things like janky scrolls, slow animations, those dreaded long tasks in your performance profiles, or if your site just feels unresponsive and your CPU is going wild, well, all these symptoms often point back to one single root cause. And that cause is something called layout thrashing. Think of it like this. Your JavaScript is basically shouting conflicting orders at the browser. It's forcing the browser to recalculate the entire page layout over and over and over again, all within the blink of an eye. A single frame. It's a recipe for terrible performance. Okay, so to figure out how to stop this madness, we gotta understand how the browser actually does its job. How does it turn our code into pixels on the screen? Let's take a peek at what's called the rendering pipeline. So it's basically a sequence of steps. First, your JavaScript runs. Then the browser figures out all the CSS styles. Then it calculates the layout, where everything goes and how big it is. After that, it paints the pixels, and finally it puts everything together on the screen in a step called composite. Now, the most important thing to get here is that these steps are not created equal. Some are way more expensive for the browser to perform than others. And yeah, you guessed it, that layout step, you'll also hear it called reflow, is the big one. It is the performance hog. This is where the browser has to figure out the geometry of everything. And if you force the browser to do that step again and again, well, that's when you get thrashing. So how do we cause this? It's something called a forced synchronous layout, and it's actually pretty simple. It happens when we mix up our reads and our writes. So imagine you change something with JavaScript, that's a write, and then in the very next line, you ask for a measurement, like an element's height, that's a read. The browser has no choice but to stop everything, recalculate the entire layout right now just to give you that number. That's the forced part. And what's kind of crazy is how a tiny change in your code can fix this. Look at the bad example. We write a new width, then we immediately read off width. Boom, forced layout. Now look at the good example. All we did was swap the two lines. We read the width first, then we set the new width. By doing this, we let the browser be smart about it. It can schedule that change without having to drop everything and recalculate. All right, so now that we know what causes the problem, this mixing of reads and writes, let's talk about the number one fix. It's a really simple idea called batching. And this is where it gets really important, especially inside a loop. Look at the bad code on the left. Inside that loop, we're writing, then reading, then reading, on every single iteration. That is textbook layout thrashing. But the good code? It's a total game changer. The principle is read first, write later. You loop through once to get all the values you need, that's your read batch. Then you loop through a second time to make all your changes. That's your write batch. Simple, clean, and so much faster. Now, you don't always have to manage this by hand, especially when things get complicated. The browser itself gives us some awesome tools. Request Animation Frame is perfect for this. It lets you schedule your changes to run right before the browser paints the next frame. You can also use Request Idle Callback for lower priority work. And if you want to make it even easier, there are libraries like FastDumb that basically do all this batching for you automatically. Okay, so we've talked a lot about JavaScript, but here's the cool part. We can be even smarter and use CSS to avoid the problem entirely. We can write our styles in a way that just sidesteps that expensive layout step altogether. And this is the secret right here. Not all CSS properties are the same. When you change things like width, height, top, or margin, you are triggering a full layout recalculation. It's expensive. But if you change properties like transform, opacity, or filter, something magical happens. The browser can handle these on a completely separate thread on the GPU using what's called the compositor. It's like moving things around on their own layer without disturbing anything else. It is way cheaper. So here's your new golden rule for animations. Instead of animating left or top, use Transform Translate X or Translate Y. It might look similar, but under the hood, it's the difference between a janky, stuttering animation and one that is perfectly silky smooth, because you're keeping the work on the compositor and off the main thread. And it gets even better with modern CSS. We have these incredible new properties. Content Visibility Auto is amazing. It literally tells the browser, hey, if this stuff is off screen, don't even bother rendering it. It's a huge performance boost for long pages. And then there's Contain, which lets you tell the browser that a certain component is like its own little island. Any changes inside it won't ever affect the layout of the rest of the page. These are seriously powerful tools. So when you put all of this together, the JavaScript batching and these smart CSS tricks, it becomes more than just a fix. It's a whole new way of thinking. It's about developing a performance mindset, so you build fast UIs from the very beginning, not as an afterthought. So this is basically your new checklist. These are the habits of a performance-minded developer. You're always thinking, how can I minimize layout work? Am I batching my leads and writes? Am I using transforms for animation? Am I using contain where it makes sense? You start doing things like virtualizing long lists and making sure you reserve space for images to prevent content from jumping around. When these things become second nature, you stop fixing jank and you just stop creating it in the first place. And really, that's what this is all about. Once you understand this simple idea that the browser has a process and that mixing reads and writes messes it up, you have the key to unlocking so much performance. You can eliminate layout thrashing and build websites that are just fundamentally faster and smoother, the kind of websites that people love to use. So the real question is, think about a project you're working on right now. Where's the first place you could apply this?